It was supposed to be the perfect beginning to a marriage that had captured the fascination of the entire world. Jeff Bezos, the richest man alive, had finally tied the knot with Lauren Sánchez, the glamorous former news anchor turned helicopter, pilot turned power player, and from the outside everything seemed like a fairy tale. The billion-dollar smiles, the couture gowns, the lavish wedding in Maui attended by the most elite names in business and entertainment. All of it suggested a couple. Entering a golden chapter, yet beneath the surface, a storm was already gathering, and insiders whispered that what looked like a honeymoon phase was in fact the opening act of a crisis. Sardinia was meant to be their triumph, a sun-drenched paradise, where Bezos's $500 million yacht Kourou gleamed against the turquoise Mediterranean waters. Champagne flowed, caviar glistened, and guests lounged in the kind of luxury most people can only imagine to them. This was not just leisure, it was theater. Every detail carefully staged to show the world that Bezos and Sanchez had not only found love, but had also built a new empire together. She glided across the decks in breezy designer whites, radiating confidence and charm, while Bezos tanned strong and relaxed, entertained his inner circle as if nothing in the world could touch them. But power carries weight, and wealth attracts shadows, and what no one at that party knew was that even as they toasted to forever, the cracks in their carefully polished image were about to split wide open. It began as a whisper, a murmur among staff that Bezos's phone had lit up with something unexpected, something serious. The kind of thing that makes the world's richest man step away from laughter and lighthearted talk and retreat into silence. No one knew what was on the screen, but everyone saw the transformation. The smile dropped. The voice lowered and the eyes darkened within minutes. The mood of the entire yacht had changed. Bezos moved, quickly, efficiently issuing orders with a tone that carried no room for doubt. Helicopters prepared security. Tightened champagne glasses abandoned mid-sip. The fantasy was over and reality had stormed in, like an uninvited guest. Insiders say what? Triggered the shift was not a minor inconvenience, but an alert from the hidden world, where reputation, money, and betrayal collide. A leak. A set of explosive recordings whispered to involve Sanchez, and a man whose name carried serious weight in global finance, not a random outsider, but someone who had circled Bezos for years, sometimes an ally, sometimes a rival, the kind of figure who could threaten both personal pride and corporate stability. The tapes insiders claimed were not simply gossip fodder. They were dynamite-carrying images and conversations that suggested more than friendship between Sanchez and this other man, and the timing could not have been more precise weeks after Bezos had said "I do," and while he still basked. In the glow of being a newlywed, suddenly the past crashed into the present with surgical force. By dawn, Bezos was gone, flown out on his Gulfstream, leaving behind his party, his bride and his super yacht, and sparking questions that raced through elite circles faster than any breaking headline. Why now? Why this, and most dangerously? What did Sanchez know, and when did she know it? The story spread quietly at first, whispered across encrypted channels and exclusive salons in Beverly Hills and New York in the kind of hushed tones usually reserved for coups and billion-dollar mergers. Because in the world of the ultra-wealthy, a secret does not have to reach the tabloids to destroy it. Only has to reach the right ears. The whispers grew. The tapes showed Sanchez not just smiling, not just laughing, but leaning in close to a man who was not her husband, a man with influence, a man who had touched Bezos's empire in more ways than one source described the footage as both intimate and strategic. Not only moments of closeness, but snippets of conversations about business, about leverage, about access. And if true, they suggested that Sanchez had blurred the line between personal relationships and corporate entanglements in ways that could be catastrophic to Bezos. The richest man alive found himself staring at a scenario where betrayal was not just of the heart, but of the empire he had spent decades building. And what shook those closest to him was not simply that Sanchez might have strayed, but that she might have been playing a much longer game. Bezos had weathered scandal before the tabloid frenzy over their affair that ended his marriage to Mackenzie Scott, the humiliating exposure of private texts, and the endless speculation about whether Sanchez was with him for love or for power. But this was different. This was not the National Enquirer or paparazzi. This was his own world, the closed circle of finance, media, and politics that truly mattered. And the sense among insiders was that someone had chosen this exact moment to strike some pointed to Sanchez's ex-boyfriend, a man who had faded from view, but who still carried old grudges and debts others suspected corporate rivals eager to weaken Bezos while he shifted focus from Amazon to Blue Origin and philanthropy. Whatever the origin, the effect was undeniable. The tapes spread quietly, but relentlessly, passing through private rooms like contraband art collectors of scandal, each new viewer adding to the pressure cooker. Sanchez herself kept smiling for the cameras, but behind the scenes, insiders described tense closed-door exchanges with Bezos. Voices raised, doors slammed, aides shuffling nervously down yacht corridors. And the chilling sense that the marriage had gone from honeymoon to survival mode in record time. It was no longer about love. It was about optics, about containment, about whether Bezos could continue to trust the woman he had just married or whether she had brought a Trojan horse into his empire. The Mediterranean sun kept shining, the sea kept sparkling, the servers kept pouring. But those closest to the scene say the glow was gone, replaced by the thick fog of suspicion that clung to every interaction. What had been a display of triumph was now a theater of doubt. And if the tapes were real, if they showed even a fraction of what insiders whispered, then this was not merely a scandal. It was an existential threat, because for Bezos' betrayal is not measured in kisses or glances. It is measured in billions, in trust and influence, and in the delicate balance of a kingdom that stretches from cloud servers to rocket launch pads. The question that now hung over the yacht over Sardinia and over every billionaire who had ever envied Bezos' life was simple. Could the richest man in the world survive the most dangerous kind of crisis? The kind that does not play out in headlines but in whispers and boardrooms, the kind that turns the person beside you into the greatest risk of all this, was supposed to be the week Bezos celebrated his love, his power, and his freedom. Instead, it became the week he was reminded that in his world nothing is private, nothing is safe, and sometimes the most lethal battles are not fought in markets or courts, but in bedrooms and on hidden tapes passed hand to hand until they reach the one person who least wants to see them. When the Gulf Stream touched down on the quiet Sardinian airfield just before dawn, it was not simply a jet arriving. It was a man retreating from the illusion of safety. The party on the yacht was still echoing with music and laughter. But for Bezos, those sounds were already distant, replaced by the cold mechanical hum of crisis. The staff who accompanied him said little, each one aware that silence was the new currency of survival, and what little chatter existed focused not on what had happened, but on what might happen next. By the time the plane was airborne, streaking westward into the night, Bezos' phone had become the axis of a storm calls, stacking messages, flashing advisors flooding him with fragments of intelligence, some reliable, others not, but all pointing toward the same conclusion. The tapes were real, and the danger was not just personal. It was structural. By the time they crossed into American airspace, the circle of knowledge had expanded exponentially. Private bankers in New York, hedge fund managers and Greenwich fixers in Los Angeles, all whispered of a cache of recordings so delicate that even a hint of their contents could destabilize alliances that had taken decades to construct. What those in the know kept repeating was that this was not a story meant for tabloids. It was a story designed to kill trust. And in the world Bezos occupied, trust was more valuable than gold inside Seattle. Amazon's headquarters buzzed with unusual energy. Executives summoned into hushed meetings, asked to prepare assessments of exposure. What if the tapes revealed conversations about logistics contracts? What if strategic plans had been compromised? What if an outsider had used a personal bond with Sanchez to gather leverage? No one knew for certain, but the possibility was enough to shake confidence. The boardrooms of Silicon Valley were no better competitors, whispered, wondered, and waited, because perception in their world often moved faster than fact. Sanchez, for her part, kept a careful silence, appearing briefly in public with the same poised smile, the same designer sunglasses, the same aura of control. But those who had been close to her for years sensed the tension. She was no stranger to whispers. Her career in media and her long history of powerful companions had already painted her as someone who thrived on proximity to influence. Yet this felt different. Old acquaintances resurfaced, offering stories of ambition, of calculated friendships, of knowing exactly how to leverage charm in rooms where others underestimated her. One former colleague remarked that Sanchez understood leverage better than most CEOs. She did not just enter circles. She embedded herself within them, becoming indispensable, until the moment she wasn't. And now, with the tapes in play, those old remarks carried new weight. The ex-boyfriend, long out of public life, suddenly became a ghostly presence in every conversation. Had he really held on to the recordings for years, waiting for the moment of maximum humiliation? And if so, why strike now? The answer insiders suggested was timing the wedding, the honeymoon glow, the carefully orchestrated image of Bezos reborn as a family man philanthropist, space visionary there. Could be no better moment to plant doubt, to fracture trust, to remind the world and Bezos himself that the past never truly disappears. Whispers of revenge circulated as well. Their breakup years ago had reportedly been bitter-laced with accusations and financial disputes. And if there was unfinished business between Sanchez and her former partner, then the leak of these recordings was more than gossip. It was retribution. But in the eyes of Bezos's advisors, it was also something far more dangerous, because mixed with the laughter and closeness were words, fragments of conversations that sounded like strategy, who held leverage in certain deals, who had access to whom, what alliances were truly fragile in the delicate ecosystem of billionaires. These were not idle comments. They were weapons if made public. They could be spun into accusations of misconduct, conflicts of interest, even insider knowledge, and whether true or exaggerated, the effect on Bezos's standing would be devastating. His empire had been built on the perception of strength, on the idea that he was always 10 steps ahead, that he saw threats before anyone else, but these tapes painted a different picture. They suggested blind spots, vulnerability, exposure, and in a world where perception shapes markets, that was enough to cause tremors already. Some allies were pulling back meetings, postponed texts, unanswered invitations, declined small gestures, but together they signaled doubt, and doubt spreads faster. Then scandal. Bezos's team scrambled crisis managers, drafted statements, legal experts explored injunctions, digital analysts tracked the spread of the files across encrypted channels. But in private, even they admitted the truth containment was impossible. Once knowledge exists in elite circles, it is like water. It finds cracks, it spreads, and it seeps into every corner. The challenge was no longer to erase, but to survive. Bezos himself kept his outward calm, seen briefly in Seattle walking into a building flanked by security shoulders, square jaw set. But those who had spent years at his side said the mask was thin behind closed doors. The mood was sharper, angrier, colder. He demanded answers, pressed aides on how much was known about. The tapes pressed advisors on whether Sanchez had ever blurred personal and business lines, and pressed himself with the unspoken question of whether his new marriage had been a miscalculation. Insiders described the dynamic between Bezos and Sanchez during those first days back as volatile, sometimes locked in long conversations, voices low and tense. Other times separated entirely, with her retreating behind closed doors and him pacing with his team outside. The whispers reached every corner of elite society. Political figures wondered if they could use the scandal as leverage. Media moguls debated whether to break the story or keep it contained. Rival billionaires sensed blood in the water, some gleeful, some cautious, all aware that one man's crisis can quickly reshape markets and opportunities. And through it all, Sanchez remained the enigma. Was she victim or architect, betrayed by an ex who sought revenge, or caught in a web she herself had spun? Insiders disagreed, some insisted she was simply unlucky, that the timing was cruel. Others hinted that her entire trajectory had been a masterclass in positioning, and that these tapes were not an accident, but the byproduct of a strategy that had finally spiraled beyond her control. Whichever the truth, the result was the same. Bezos stood at the center of a storm, his new marriage already under suspicion, his empire already calculating damage, and the narrative that had begun as a fairy tale honeymoon now morphed into a story of betrayal, ambition, and survival. And in the whispered corners of power, the question that echoed was not whether Bezos would endure the scandal, but how much of himself he would lose in the process, because in his world, survival always comes at a price, and sometimes the price is higher than even the richest man on earth is willing to pay. The storm that began in whispers was now an uncontainable current threading through the highest levels of power in New York, Los Angeles, London, and Riyadh, and wherever men and women with influence gathered. The question was no longer whether the tapes existed, but how damaging they might be for Bezos, and how much of that damage could be turned into opportunity. Allies who once basked in his orbit began to recalculate discreetly. Of course, no one severs ties with the richest man alive openly, but small signs betrayed the shift: a postponed dinner in Manhattan, a politely declined invitation to a philanthropic gala, an unexplained silence in group chats, where Bezos once dominated with quips and strategic hints. The calculus was simple. Power is proximity, and proximity to weakness is dangerous. And in this moment, Bezos looked weaker than he had at any point in the past 2 decades. The timing was surgical, too close to his marriage for anyone to ignore too soon after his Maui wedding. Spectacle for anyone to dismiss. Insiders whispered that Sanchez's ex had not simply stumbled on the release, but orchestrated it with precision, holding the tapes like a weapon, and choosing to drop them at the one moment when humiliation would cut deepest for Bezos, not just as a man, but as a symbol of stability and dominance. The idea of revenge coursed through elite circles like an undercurrent. The ex had reportedly been sidelined, pushed aside in the rise of Bezos and Sanchez, and what better way to reclaim relevance than to stain their union at its most celebrated hour? Yet even as revenge remained the easy explanation, more cynical voices suggested something colder: that the leak had been encouraged, or even weaponized by rivals who saw in Bezos's personal chaos a chance to slow him down as he expanded Blue Origin, as he sought new footholds in media and politics. Because in the world of billionaires, a scandal is not just entertainment, it is strategy, and the fall of one titan always leaves room for another into this maelstrom. Sanchez herself remained a paradox to some. She was the wronged woman betrayed by a man from her past who could not let go to others. She was a player who had danced on the edge of power for too long and finally slipped too close to the fire. Her past resurfaced in stories that now circulated with fresh urgency: tales of cozy dinners with Hollywood moguls, helicopter flights for media bosses, strategic friendships that always seemed to open doors. One former acquaintance called her a connector, the kind of person who could walk into a room of strangers and leave knowing everyone who mattered. And for years, that ability had been an asset for Bezos. She softened his image, opened doors in social worlds he had never cared to enter. But now the same skill looked suspicious, like a double-edged sword. For insiders, the question shifted from whether she had been unfaithful to whether she had blurred lines between intimacy and strategy, using proximity to Bezos to benefit others or perhaps herself. And if that suspicion ever solidified into fact, the fallout would be nuclear. Bezos's empire thrived on the myth of control, the idea that nothing slipped past him, that every move was calculated and precise, but the tapes threatened to rewrite that myth into one of blindness, vulnerability, even naivete, as if the man who built Amazon and raced rockets to space could not see the dangers standing in his own bedroom. The irony was not lost on rivals who smelled blood. Elon Musk privately joked in a dinner circle that the richest man alive had been brought low not by regulators or competitors, but by romance, an offhand comment that drew nervous laughter but captured the ruthless amusement with which the ultra-wealthy watched each other stumble. In Washington, political operatives whispered too. If Sanchez's closeness with certain executives touched sensitive sectors, could opponents of Bezos use the scandal to clip his influence in lobbying or to stoke distrust in his philanthropic pledges? Every possibility was discussed, because in the corridors of power perception, moves markets and narratives kill faster than facts. Through it all, Bezos pressed on publicly, his appearances controlled, brief and deliberate. But insiders said the tension behind closed doors was unbearable. One advisor described it as watching a king play chess, knowing he has already lost his queen. Another said Bezos alternated between icy calm and explosive frustration, demanding to know how the tapes had circulated, who had them, and how far they had spread in his quieter moments. Those close to him suspected the real torment lay in doubt. Doubt about Sanchez, about her loyalty, about whether he had married a partner or a liability. Insiders said their conversations had grown jagged, sometimes long and exhausted, other times short and brutal. Sanchez insisting she was innocent, Bezos pressing for explanations, neither fully convinced by the other. The marriage that had been painted as a love story was already mutating into a battlefield, and the battlefield was watched by the most powerful spectators on Earth. The ex-boyfriend, meanwhile, lingered like a phantom, his silence louder than any statement. Because in silence, people project motives, revenge, humiliation, leverage, perhaps even an attempt to signal to Bezos himself that no fortress is impenetrable. What little emerged about him only deepened. The mystery-old acquaintances hinted at a man skilled in patience, A man who knew when to wait and when to strike. And if true, then his timing was genius because in hitting now, he had ensured not only personal pain for Sanchez, but strategic pain. For Bezos, his rivals did not have to lift a finger. The tapes did the work, and all they had to do was watch the fallout. Bezos, who had weathered storms before now, faced a threat unlike any he had known. Not a competitor, not a government, not a market. Crash! But the possibility that the person he trusted most was the source of his undoing. The most dangerous scandals are not the ones splashed across tabloids. They are the ones whispered in private, the ones that spread through boardrooms and dinner, tables shaping perception in ways no press release can control. And in that sense, this scandal was perfect, precision-timed, expertly targeted, impossible to contain and devastating in its insinuations. What Bezos knew, what Sanchez knew, and what the ex had chosen to reveal had become the currency of whispers across the world. And in those whispers, the richest man alive was no longer untouchable. He was human, fallible, exposed. And for men like Bezos, that is the most lethal image of all. From the outside, the world thought Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sánchez had everything. The money, the yachts, the diamonds, the spotlight. But behind closed doors, the perfect image began to crack. The whispers of doubt, the rumors of jealousy, the late-night arguments that spilled into their gilded mornings. Everything that looked like a fairy tale started to resemble a battlefield, because love mixed with power and power mixed with ego is never simple. Lauren wanted to be seen not just as the partner of the richest man alive, but as the star in her own story, while Jeff wanted peace, control, order, a life designed with precision like his rockets and satellites. But marriage is not built like a launch pad. It is messy, unpredictable, fragile, and no amount of billions can buy the silence of resentment or the warmth of real trust. Their rocky start became a headline, their disagreements a spectacle. Every trip, every dinner, every stolen glance was dissected by the world, as if their marriage was a stage play written for the public. And the more they tried to hold on to each other, the more the cracks seemed to widen. Yet there is something undeniable between them. A magnetism that survives the storms, because even in their most turbulent moments, they both knew they had stepped into something too big to walk away from Jeff with his empire. Lauren with her fire, both trapped and drawn to each other in equal measure. So the question is simple. Will their love conquer the chaos, or will the chaos define them? Because for Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sánchez, the rocky beginning may only be the opening act of a story the world will never stop watching.
This video covers legal allegations in a news context. All claims are from official filings and no guilt is implied until proven in court. Please keep all discussions respectful. Allegations are not facts until proven in court.
Subscribe to my channel and also press this bell icon.